So here it is, Gran Meccanismo, Clockpunk Roleplaying in DaVinci's Florence. This comes to us from Osprey Games, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Osprey Games primarily, or it has a lot of work in the miniature gaming space. So uh, coming at it a bit from that angle, that definitely see that in the game mechanics. And then the other thing to talk about is the author here, Mark Galliotto, or Gagliotti. I apologize if I got that pronunciation wrong. Uh, Beyond, he does do some gaming writing, but beyond that, he is a certified historian. He's an analyst in international studies and relations. He does a lot of work. A lot of his other uh, writing is on Russian politics and history. So, keep that in mind that this is written by someone who has that sort of lens on the world. And I think it's something to think about with this book is that it is something of a alternate history book that you can play in. That's not to say that the mechanics aren't uh, don't have something to offer, but they are not necessarily crunchy in as some other systems. But this is a really unique book, and I don't see many people talk about it. But it's gotten a fair amount of attention in the shop in Tabletop Bookshelf. So I'll take just a quick second before I dig into it. Please stick with me. Tabletop Bookshelf is an online independent bookstore. We are dedicated to crowdfunded books and independent publishers primarily, of which this is not. I understand, and this comes through in the quality of construction on this book. Um, this is 100 some pages, but the quality of this hardcover book and the binding here and the paper is very impressive. This is like coated paper. It's actually, there's so much glare coming off of it that I'll have to be a little careful as I flip through this. Point being, there was a lot of care put into the construction of this book. Uh, these books come to us as second chance books. So these have reimbursement marks on it. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, that means that this book was circulated at some point, was never purchased, it was never read, but it made its way back to a warehouse, and I'm able to get it in this condition, which is you can see is basically like new, and offer to all of you at a good discount. So you can look at the link down below to get more information about that. But now let's talk about Gran Meccanismo. So Gran Meccanismo, this book starts off bringing you right into the world. So let's look at the table of contents here. And this is another thing where I think a lot of other games will start you off with characters. So this is putting the world first, very clearly bringing you into the setting before it introduces characters you can play and the rules of the system. So again, thinking of it as sort of an alternate history book first, but it's a really fascinating alternate history. And this, I think, gives an indication, this image here gives an indication of what's going on, showing someone here at this computer bank, essentially, in this Florentine setting. And uh, this is important to understand that when they are talking about a scientific revolution, it's almost fantastic in nature. So there is the Gran Meccanismo, uh, which is a large, essentially computer built on water clocks and other clock-like mechanisms. And this is someone working at that Gran Meccanismo through an interface, essentially an old mainframe computer, putting punch cards in it. So again, it's really mixing up this historical idea. It's pushing before the Industrial Revolution. It's positing that what if these other higher tech things happened in this setting, um, which I think is a really unique idea. I don't see a lot of uh, books that try to push that. So you see here, one of the characters in that. This is a glider who is getting ready to take off in one of the new flying machines. And then it gives you a nice map of Italy here, and Florence being the center, and the various factions here. So you can see this is going to be a pretty rich world for intrigue. There's lots of different factions that you can play off of, build those political settings. So I think this game thrives if you are looking for to play that sort of political lens. This is also near Rome, the seat of the Catholic Church. So that becomes an interesting piece to overlay on this. So because you are in Florence, this place of new science, the church is against this new science in many cases. So that sets up a nice dynamic where you're kind of pushing against this Catholic theocracy. Another thing I'll say that's nice here is they do have guide notes in all of the descriptions of the world. So the GM in this setting or in this book is called, the game runner is called the guide. And so you're not just getting descriptions of the world, you're also getting indications of how you can activate that world in play at your table. Talks about, really goes through, this is a pretty text heavy book, but it really goes into detail about all the different factions and cities within Italy, again providing those guide notes, and occasionally interspersing it with these portraits that usually have a little indication of, give you a sense of the flavor. And then sometimes they add these, I like these, kind of look like DaVinci's writings or DaVinci's drawings here, and giving you ideas of the sort of technology that you could introduce into your game. There is broader Europe to play in, but in this case it would mostly be backdrop. It really should be a Italy focused book. Here's another nice picture showing Machiavelli. So again, the interesting thing about this time is your characters should be interacting with a lot of historical figures that have recognizable names like Da Vinci or Machiavelli. But the thing I like about this picture is you can see here like this little balloon in the background. Sometimes there's just little details that you can pick out in the background there. Here's a picture of Leonardo da Vinci himself, and he has this special ocular mechanism that he put after he lost his eye in one of his experiments. And the really, what's central here to this reality is that Machiavelli is the person who recognized the genius of Da Vinci and really pushed all these resources to allow him to become an inventor extraordinaire. And Leonardo ran with that and just became obsessed with the idea. Really nice map of Florence here. I wish it gave you a little bit more details of places you could visit as a player in here, but this is a really great picture with a lot of the Leonardo detailing throughout. Does dig into the city some more and talks about everyday life. This idea of clockers. So again, this idea that there is some sort of computation happening here, but that computation is done through clockers essentially. So instead of hackers, you have clockers. There is again very very text heavy book, but it's all interesting because there's a lot to pull out of this kernel of an idea of Florence gaining this power. Talks about the military changes that would happen because of some of these inventions. So, like for instance, the first submarine how that upends things. And they have like a great idea here. The hunt for the red Otavio could be a adventure, a story seed for your players. Um, just flipping through here a little quickly because again it's text heavy. So this is interesting page. So this talks about the other. So this game does not shy away from historical accuracy. And this little section here, handling tricky topics, really does one of the better jobs that I've seen talking about handling problematic or topics that could be problematic. And it simply lays out that some groups may find interest in playing a storyline that involves some of these elements, uh, and might actually be excited about playing, someone who was oppressed because of their uh, background. But it clearly tells you in this paragraph, some people, however, might find these topics very problematic, and some might even be disturbed by some of these topics. And it's simply up to you as a table to talk about what you want your game to be about. And I think that's just it's just one of the better succinct ways that I've heard or that I've seen spelled out of how to handle topics that can be perilous. Another good picture here showing this tank-like mechanism against these phalanx of soldiers. Um, Characters. So characters in this game are not as heroic as you would find in other stories. This is not a heroic fantasy story. You have three uh, attributes: body, mind, soul, and those an average is 3, but I believe you can have uh, they can have 1 or up to 12 potentially. Well, no, I'm sorry. Those are traits. So they're broken into the attributes, which could be typically have a value of 3 when you start, or could have 4 that would denote a level of expertise. And then there are traits which could have up to a level of 12, 12 being very legendary. And what these numbers do is they indicate how many dice you're rolling in a d6 dice pool. So this is where the miniature gaming background, I think, is most apparent. You're building dice pools of d6s based on your traits and your abilities and your attributes. So you have your attributes, you add your traits, and then you can add like scene traits. You could exploit flaws in your opponents to add to your dice pool, and then you are rolling that dice against the guide who is also rolling a pool of dice, and then you are comparing successes, where a 4 or a 5 counts as 1 success and a 6 counts as 2 successes. So it's very straightforward. You're always just each person is rolling a big pool of dice, but the exciting thing is you're kind of building up this big pool of dice that you get to roll that could be over 10 dice. And the idea is kind of as you're building that dice pool, you're describing what your character is doing. Character creation here, concept attributes, which I talked about before. When you start off, you have a total of 9 to spend, so you could go 3, 3, 3, or split them up however you like. And then after that, you have different traits, and you get a certain amount at each level. So you get 1 trait that would be 4D, 5 traits that start at 3D. So you get a lot of traits. So instead of skills, you are using your traits to add to your dice rolls. And a trait could be something, like um, good with my hands. That's a 1d1, for example, or a big name in banking. So you, if you narratively can find a way to fit that trait into the test you're doing, you add to the pool that way. It also allows you to say, you know what, we're not going to figure out all the traits. Let's start off with some of them, and then we can add traits as we play, which is a good way to get into it. Again, more kind of this fantastical clockwork image. Here's like a wound up mechanical clockwork dog. So again, you can go pretty fantastical with these ideas, and making clear that, again, this is your story. If you want to add more fantasy to it, you're welcome to do that. There also is your wealth level. That's done with a d6 dice pool. There's no tracking of resources, again, in the system. If you want something, you can typically find it if it's at your level of lifestyle. If it's above your level of lifestyle, then you're making a wealth roll. And then it gives you some ideas for different characters here. The Artificer, some of these definitely feel more heroic, but some of them are very quite mundane, right? Like a banker or the farmer. Now that's definitely not gonna appeal to every player, but there certainly are players who want to play that sort of average person, maybe even an anti-hero, and try to pit them against some of these bigger characters, reminding you that even the farmer is going to have an equal amount of dice or bonuses that they can tap into. So they could easily, if with clever use of their traits, uh, win against some of the more powerful people in the setting. But there's a lot of templates here, and again, these are archetypes that you could quickly pull from and modify a little bit. It just helps speed up the character creation process, give you ideas for characters who would make good actors within this story world. A lot, right? Sailor, scholar, soldier. Here you can see there is like a revolver type weapon in the setting. But again, they don't describe every weapon. There's no page of weapons here. You would say that as a trait, like I have or an equipment trait. There is also equipment that you can have that can add to your dice pool. The workman. You can have an origin, so you can pick your background, and that can also be used to tap into extra dice pool bonuses. And then challenges. So this is talking about that dice pool system. Gives you a nice table here giving you the average level of success for different amount of dice, which is helpful if you've never played with this sort of system before. It gives you a sense of how many dice can lead to a certain amount of success. Gives you an idea for average difficulty levels. And gives you some gameplay examples of how those dice pools get built. One thing that I really like about this system is the way that it also handles damage traits. So there's this idea of margin of outcome. So if you had a combat encounter, let's say two people were fighting, they rolled dice against each other, and they win by 2. You're gonna take that margin of victory damage to you. In this case, 2 is gonna be a wound. You're also gonna get that damage trait. And this is so you can get negative traits as your player, and then during certain encounters. So this is a nice way of having a wound system that also has some flavor to it. So you're not just getting a wound of -2. You're also getting a wound, let's say mangled hand, -2. Now, in other scenarios, the guide can exploit that flaw, that damage trait, to add to their dice pool. So that I can say, well, I'm going to climb this wall. I'm going to roll my dice for climb. And the guide can say, okay, well, I'm going to build my 6 dice pool, but I'm also going to add 2 dice because you have the mangled hand damage trait. So you get an idea of how you're doing that. You're sort of you're using the narrative to build your dice pools, your competing dice pools. The guide and the player are having this dialogue together, and then finally rolling it off and determining a winner, and then continuing with the story. Um, it does give you some ideas about healing. There is a nudges system, which kind of like an inspiration. It can give you a little bonus to a roll, and you can do things to get nudges. So there is a little bit of gameplay in there, but again, it's more in service of driving a narrative forward. But the understanding with mature players that you are not totally in control of the story. There's also goals. Each player has a long-term goal, a medium goal, and a short-term goal. And those different goals can be used to also add to your dice pool. So if something you are doing, if you can argue that it lines up with your long-term goal, you can add 5 dice to that dice roll pool. Now that can only be done one per session, but that gives you another idea. Your players have a lot of mechanisms to see what I did there. A lot of mechanismos to give your players extra dice. And then there also is a doubt system, though, which is another cool kind of negative trait system. So if you use your goal to fill up a dice pool and you still fail, you're going to get a doubt, and that is going to, again, negatively impact your rolls. So, you know, it's a simple game system. If you've never played with the tripod system before, I certainly have not. There's definitely some interesting things to be found in it. Its closest thing that I played to is the Blades dice system. They're very similar, or the Year Zero from Free League, also using that D6 pool, has a similar feel as well. And then it does give you rules for advancement. So this isn't a super long-term campaign sort of game, but you definitely could play uh, a mini campaign. You could probably play a fairly significant campaign too, and build yourself up to actually getting legendary traits. So if you had a character who was really interested in becoming a legendary figure in the world, you could get there, but I would say it would be a fairly significant amount of play. So while it's not necessarily designed for the type of advancement, it doesn't have the crunchy advancement that you would see in like D&D or something like that. There still's the opportunity for significant advancement here. You could play for quite a while. And they give you an idea of how to build that episodic arc and also how to influence history in the world. So they make it a little bit difficult. You have to really think of how you're going to get past these certain uh, signposts or goalposts to really tilt the world. And then there is a nice place at the back here talking about what it means to be a guide, your GM tips. One thing they do talk about here that's interesting is this Clockpunk idea, which they use at the front, I would say, a little bit as a piece of branding. Uh, because when I think of cyberpunk, I'm usually thinking of a setting where you are against some sort of authoritarian uh, rule. Usually, there is you're dealing with authoritarianism and the fight against that. That's been enabled by technology. That does not come through so much in this alternate history, but he acknowledges it here, and you can play that up. You could easily have Gran Meccanismo, this new computer, be way more powerful than it seems. Perhaps other people are using it to control people, or perhaps it's controlling people themselves. So um, it's just another thing that shows that the author put a lot of thought into this and acknowledges that idea as well. Tells you how to build some NPCs if you want to make significant characters versus non-significant, some basic animal settings. So again, like no stat blocks here. They're just going to be dice pool challenges. And it says like what you don't need to worry about. What it really is talking about here is keeping things moving. All you really have to do is build your dice pool and roll against each other, and that's about it. There's no heavy rules to look up. It does talk about bringing, if you do want to bring in those war elements, how to play with armies. But again, not like how are we going to roll all these minis or handle all these minis. It's like how am I going to use our D6 dice pool system to handle those sort of mass conflicts. And then reminding again that the player characters are the center here, and the rules are not the boss. And finally, this book as well makes clear that to play with kindness and inclusion, which is great. It acknowledges that safety tools are there, especially if you're bringing this, especially useful if you're bringing this to convention play or something like that. At the end, you get a nice little appendix, and you get your character sheet here. Again, gives you a good idea of how you're interfacing in the world, different than what you're going to have from other character sheets. Not a lot of numbers here. You're really just putting in your body, mind, soul. You're writing traits down with your dice pools here, your short-term goals, and your if you have doubts, if you get damage, you have to write that down there. But again, not a lot of not a lot of number stats, not a lot of skill points that you're tallying up. You're really creating narrative traits that are controlling what your character can do in the world. So that is Gran Meccanismo, a really unique book. And again, this is not typically what I cover here. This isn't a crowd-funded title. This comes from a big publisher, but this is, again, one of these second chance books that we get a chance to save before they, maybe end up um, uh, in a landfill. We can get them to the audience that deserves to see them. This is a surprise, and I think an interesting book if you are into alternate history, and if you are um, also want to think of explore a different gaming system, a different way of doing a D6 dice pool. There's a lot of interesting little nuggets in here to think about that you could bring back to your own game. All right, that's it. That's Gran Meccanismo. I hope you enjoyed this flip through. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. I'll be doing these about once a week, and you can also get this at the shop. I'll include a link down below. Thanks, and happy gaming.